Hello, thanks for joining. And thank you to any replay viewers as well. So I'm going off to bed soon, but I wanted to note this result that US unemployment claims have soared to 3.3 million, quadrupling the record from 1982 as layoffs from the coronavirus engulf the economy. So the estimate was closer to 1.6 million. To me, this betrays more of the underlying weakness that existed in the American economy and was being covered up. There were reports on it, but propagandists like Trump and his administration rely on noise, the ability to crowd out real, valuable information. So there were reports on the manufacturing recession induced by Trump's misguided foray into trade wars. And who can forget his tweet, "Trade wars are good and easy to win," caused massive problems for American farmers that he papered over by throwing $28 billion worth of American taxpayer money to help make farmers temporarily forget the pain caused to them by Trump's misguided and downright negligent adoption of a trade war. So, yes, I think the amount of layoffs following the pause on the economy that's necessary to prevent even worse economic devastation as a consequence of hundreds of thousands of Americans falling sick with severe cases of the Corona-19 virus. People pretend, Republicans particularly like to pretend that it's a choice. Do we take measures to protect the American people from the further spread of a pandemic, or do we enjoy economic growth? And it's not an either-or situation in the slightest. Do we take proactive measures to reduce the spread of the pandemic, of which 20% of cases are severe and cause for hospitalization for up to weeks of treatment to prevent deaths? Or do we act reactively once the deaths escalate even further and spread becomes so widespread that the number of bed capacity that is exceeded hits a factor of perhaps 30 instead of 10. So if you imagine you have one ICU bed and 10 people who need it, I was just noting Rachel Maddow's reporting from people in, was it Louisiana, estimate that for every single bed they have in the ICU, the estimate is as high as up to 14 people might need that bed. 14 patients for potentially each ICU bed that they have in their hospital system. So it is a bit good morning Vietnam here. Hello, France. Yes, Louisiana has such a high uptick in number of cases, potentially as a consequence of the social mixing from the Mardi Gras, but ultimately as a consequence of being lied to by the person occupying the Oval Office with the highest profile position in the land, who discounted and derided the existence of the coronavirus epidemic for months, instead of following the pandemic handbook. And that handbook has been released today. A reporter called Dan Diamond, I should be able to find it for you, just the link, so you can read it for yourself. The Trump administration had that handbook. It takes them through steps to consider. Ask if healthcare workers have enough personal protective gear. Does the national stockpile need to release stores to states? Does more need to be ordered? Does the Defense Production Act need to be initiated and enacted? Yes, so previously during the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, St. Louis took preventative measures in a proactive way. Within days of the first few cases, they cancelled parades. They closed schools. Philadelphia took the opposite approach, had far more cases, had a spike in cases, exceeded hospital capacity, had far greater numbers of deaths. So this is the type of situation now where everybody will know someone who died. And now it's a question of, can we stop Trump's most egregious delinquencies so that it doesn't become someone from every family who dies? So we'll all know someone personally who is likely to have a severe case and potentially die, particularly if hospital systems are not assisted to the degree that they need, and hospital collapse becomes systemic and broad across America, but particularly concentrated in the red states where Trump-attending governors are neglecting to initiate public health and safety measures, such as closing bars, closing schools, that they're saying nonsensical things such as the US isn't China. You begin to see the weight of leadership and how great is suffering when leadership fails, to see what is likely to happen in states where they are still mixing and they are still encouraged to go to bars and restaurants and schools and social events and parties, and to know how many infections will arise as a consequence of that, how many transmission chains will be made and perpetuated, and how 2 weeks following that, the cases will begin to turn up at the hospital, the gasping for breath, the fever, the digestive systems, which are symptoms that apparently turn up in approximately 50% of cases, but are often not talked about. We talk about fever, cough, shortness of breath, but apparently 50% of cases, of severe cases, are also showing gastrointestinal disturbances such as diarrhea and loss of appetite. So someone's making a comment that this reminds you of the early days of AIDS. That was also a significant disease outbreak, and people erected false, fabricated realities around themselves that it was a disease that was only going to affect a certain demographic, and it wasn't true. Sexually active people could catch the disease, not just gay people, but people, it was a heterosexual disease, and that false reality that infected the consciousness of leaders such as Ronald Reagan and people working for him in his administration did not undertake sufficient measures to protect the American public from that epidemic. Paul is noting that diarrhea and loss of appetite can lead to severe dehydration. Someone asks me what I think about this virus. It's ravaging Europe. It's ravaging Italian cities, Spanish cities. It began in China, and the Chinese government tried to hide it and cautioned doctors who were being honest about this unusual strain of disease that exhibited flu-like symptoms but was more difficult to treat, more resilient, more contagious. And we now know that it's likely to be spread by aerosol means as well. So you don't just have to be coughed on. You can just be near someone breathing the same air as them potentially for a while, which would explain why a lot of healthy young health professionals in China were also struck with the disease. If the viral load is too great, that can potentially be a factor in contracting a severe case. It's going to take hold around the world, but some leadership will do more to minimize that gap between the number of available beds and the number of people who need beds, hospital beds, and significant hospital treatment, who minimize that excess of people falling outside of the bed capacity of hospitals in their nation. Because people need beds for more things than just coronavirus as well, which often requires lengthy 1 to 3 weeks of hospital monitoring, oxygenation, potentially ventilation as well. And being intubated is a very unpleasant experience. And my sympathy for all those patients who are being intubated and can't even have hospital visitors, people who can't hold the hand of a relative. Yes. Bob is pointing out that one of the new symptoms being reported is for early on is loss of taste and smell. So that relates to the appetite suppression. When you can't smell or taste food, it reduces your interest. So the pandemic that's sweeping the world, for people to survive, requires a leadership that addresses the virus and also addresses the economic devastation that is consequent a secondary consequence of the virus. So that can be managed with stimulatory payments and governments going into debt now that can be repaid later with whatever remnants of a financial system remain after. But the people who are positive are often people who don't seem to have their heads around a lot of the facts of this situation. People that still expect the federal government of the United States to act normally and appropriately. Still expect leaders to do more than mouth platitudes about the economy, mouth platitudes about how it's up to the individual to stay home. People take behavioral cues from their leaders. They take behavioral cues from the tone of their leaders, from the framing of their leaders, from the actions of their leaders. And Trump has stood up with a podium, and Dr. Fauci has allowed everybody to share a microphone instead of equipping everybody with a personal handheld microphone connected to a speaker, as if the United States can't afford to model for its leaders, to model safe distancing. They've all still shaken hands, touched their faces, etc. Touching the face is an involuntary reaction, and I don't condemn them too much for it, but they have also modeled extensive lying. So when Trump has stood at the podium for his briefings of the American public every day and lied to them that Navy ships have been converted to hospital ships and are coming straight away, lied to them that the FDA has approved antiviral medication for use of COVID-19. The FDA hasn't approved of anti-malarial drugs to be used for the virus. Trump has lied that there are enough masks. When he lied that everybody who wants a test can get a test, people flooded into hospitals to get tested, and there weren't tests. But in order to even respond to the people rushing and flocking into hospitals, that used up huge sources of personal protective equipment that you're supposed to put on freshly when you engage with each new hospital patient. So people rushing to hospitals on March the 6th because of Trump's March the 6th pronouncement that everybody who wants a test can get a test depleted America's hospital resources. Apparently, it's Nancy Pelosi's birthday. That's nice. Good news for Nancy Pelosi. The stimulus package has passed, which is great. Some Republican senators were still complaining that unemployment benefits would encourage people to quit their job, because what a great thing to complain about during a time of incredible economic hardship and economic collapse. The more stimulus, the more households can respond in a confident way and not in a despairing, contracting way. So to have some degree of economic continuity, you need massive stimulatory payments, and the countries that get that right will fare far better than other countries. But too many Republicans are drunk on lies and mythology about wealth, and their rationalizations that have arisen like a chrysalis around an evil butterfly, a web of rationalizations of why selfishness is good and why denialism about America's previous systems of taxation that helped grow America, fund amazing bits of infrastructure that encouraged America to prosper and flourish. So Paul is noting that leaders in Canada are informative and are working across party lines to try and help. That's excellent. No, a one-time payment isn't good enough because it doesn't give people sufficient peace of mind that as the situation deteriorates, they will be able to pay their bills and not be homeless and can still expend money on their needs. So no, people under those conditions of fear and instability are much more likely to try and conserve every dollar that they have. To make people confident enough to spend any type of money at all, you need to be generous and abundant with your stimulatory measures. It's Keynesian Economics 101, and it works. It's been demonstrated to work multiple times across the world in multiple economies. And I can give you the specific example of Australian stimulatory payments of $900 during the global financial crisis, which is a much less severe crisis than this would appear to be in its trajectory. So thank you to everybody who's been commenting, much appreciated. I'll do a tiny scroll more through my Twitter account to see if there's any breaking news that I want to share with you. These are accounts of people, doctors, who are being encouraged to keep their masks in paper bags after each shift, to then reopen those bags after 3 days and reuse them to conserve resources because they're running out of masks. But Australians recently found that, I can show you, coronavirus survived in Princess Cruise cabins up to 17 days after passengers left. As much as 17 days. They tested it after 17 days and they still found live viral particles in the cabins of infected passengers. So doctors being asked to leave their paper masks, and I'll bring that up with you on screen so you can see what I see, which is a news story showing you that coronavirus RNA found in Princess cruise ship cabins up to 17 days after passengers left. Let's see how much you can see that. Yep, you can see that headline. So that's a CNBC news article, which you can locate yourself if you wish to Google it. Some are wearing surgery masks over the N95 masks to keep them cleaner, presumably because they have more stores of the surgery masks. Interesting. All right. Any final thoughts that anybody wants to share today before I go? I hope everybody's been watching and circulating those very punchy 30-second ads that castigate Donald Trump, just with his own words, showing the timeline of cases that have increased of coronavirus in the US as Trump has denied, prevaricated, misrepresented what's happening, done the opposite of what a responsible leader would do. But a lot of us who've been following American politics closely would know that Trump is in all likelihood a Russian asset beholden to the Russian government, that is to say Vladimir Putin, one of the wealthiest men, likely the wealthiest man in the entire world, who wants to expand his personal wealth still further. People are so goal-oriented sometimes, and when you're a vicious, murdering oligarch, sometimes you just even want more than $200 billion stashed in offshore accounts around the world. You want people to end the Magnitsky sanctions against you and against your countrymen because you want to maintain power over others and you want to maintain your wealth. So we know that all the evidence points to Trump being beholden. Okay, this is an important ad. I will press play.
This is their new hoax.
We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China.
One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear.
When you have 15 people, and within a couple of days it's going to be down to close to zero, we really think we've done a great job in keeping it down to a minimum.
I like this stuff. I really get it. People are surprised that I understand it.
No, I don't take responsibility at all.
Priorities USA Action is responsible for the content of this ad.
Oh, Bob is asking if I heard from my dad. My dad is fine. He's self-isolating. He has no symptoms at the moment. Yes. Biden has a new ad too. Yes. I don't quite like the Biden one as much because it includes a bit at the end of Trump blaming Obama and his administration. And I prefer to exclude that just because as a closing message, it's still pushing, it's leaving the final message resonating in people's head is still an assertion of Obama's incompetence. And that's certainly not the case. I don't want to activate those memories and those neural habits that so many Americans have of just deferring to blaming Obama, deferring to Fox News pundits who encourage them to blame Obama irrationally. So Paul saw and shared that ad earlier. Somebody was saying they encouraged, so Fox News cut off part of what Dr. Fauci was saying. I've been kind of rude about Dr. Fauci for a little bit because he lied about what Italian doctors were doing, Italian government was doing. He said that they hadn't cut off their borders when they actually had. Oh, sorry. Here's Nancy Pelosi now that I know it's her birthday. I'm more excited. She's pleased that the Senate bill is moving forward, amended by Democrats to put families first. So if you come across any conservative accounts on Twitter, you'll see that they're all misrepresenting and lying about what the Democrats have tried to do, although also just capitalizing on the reality gap, that it's Democrats primarily who take climate change seriously. So where they complain that Democrats tried to put pro-social legislation in to, say, protect Americans as well from the consequences of climate change by taking measures to reduce climate change and the devastation associated with climate change. People who follow conservative accounts, they don't engage with that reality. Republicans have been shown over and over again to not believe that climate change is real, to discount science. And this pandemic is a really big opportunity for a wake-up call to people in a way that don't discount scientists, or we do that at our peril. Scientists are people who primarily are interested in promoting the truth and in discovering the truth. That is literally their occupation, to test, to discern, to hypothesize, to distill truth from evidence. And they're not always correct. Their framing is not always perfect, but their intention, or the intention of science, is to produce truth and benefit communities, individuals, and species. So the distrust of science that's been cultivated by vested interests, typically in the fossil fuel industry, and it's been discovered, millions of dollars cultivating think tanks that lied to people, think tanks that just knew it would be easy enough to push people over the edge of dismissing climate change as a problem because people didn't want climate change to be a problem. It's like admitting your baby is ugly. Our baby is industrialization, and we all benefit from it. It's our prosperity, it's our lifestyle. It's hard to hear that it has a fundamental problem with it that also puts all of our lives in jeopardy while particularly hurting poor people first, but then the rest of us next. And that could conceivably lead to mass crop failure, is already leading to agricultural failures in South America, resulting in people fleeing to the US for asylum, which is now resulting to tens of thousands of migrants, often climate change refugees, in Trump admin organized concentration camps, where just like similar to the way typhus ravaged through Hitler's concentration camps, killing Anne Frank and her sister and multiple other family members and millions of people, the coronavirus is likely to ravage the population of Trump's detention camps. The children may be spared to a degree, but with the viral load, the lack of hygiene, the insufficient nutritional provision of nutritional food, being fed insufficiently thawed burritos, and perhaps a spoonful of applesauce after visiting nutritionists complained that the camp diets included no fruit or vegetables for the children, for the detained children. That is on America's conscience, collectively speaking, because Trump did that and we inadequately responded. We, like climate change, found it so uncomfortable it was easy to turn away with, and it was easy to embrace our own powerlessness rather than keep up the fight. It also sometimes seemed that complaining on behalf of the detained children sometimes made them more gleeful in the Trump supporters' denunciation of Democrats, and it fit into their narrative that we don't care about risks and they are the only people who are worthy of being gatekeepers of who's in charge, because they are happy to exclude children from America and they're happy to persecute children and persecute adults because they'll do whatever needs to be done. The same as torturing detainees in Guantanamo, it doesn't actually help the information that you get from torturing people is typically inaccurate, and people will say anything to stop being tortured. They won't necessarily tell you the truth. They'll just admit to whatever they think you'll believe, whatever you need to hear to stop torturing them. And in the same way, Trump has tortured child migrants to please his base, which are drunk on the empowerment of cruelty, the empowerment of abandoning normal social standards. And we've seen it before in Hitler's Germany, the empowered German public cheering Hitler at his rallies because of the promise of prioritizing their needs and that promise of making all their problems evaporate, which arises from a charismatic snake oil salesman whose cunning is only surpassed by his maliciousness towards people that he's happy to throw under the bus. For Trump, it's people of Mexican background or South American background. He's happy for them to be under the bus. Private prison owners donate millions of dollars to his political campaigns, and they in turn receive extraordinary amounts from the taxpayer purse, $775 per child per night. And when you have over 14,000 detained children and over 70,000 detained migrants altogether, those are substantial sums in the pockets of private prison owners who donate to Donald Trump and are rewarded mightily for their donations. It's not an efficient way to run a country. It's not a moral way, but it's also a very damaging, dangerous way. And we now all share the danger that America is in because of this mishandling of the coronavirus, the purposeful lying about it, the failure to activate the Defense Production Act of 1950. And actually, which should have been activated 2 months ago, Trump should have, at the first discussion of pandemic, at the first evidence of the conditions in China that would have been disclosed to him. And he was already given the pandemic response manual when he assumed office. So he knew, and for whatever reason, he chose to believe that it wasn't a problem, or he chose to believe that the benefit to him would outweigh the benefit to him of doing nothing would outweigh the benefit of him acting to protect the American people. We're all under the bus for Trump right now. And blue states may fare better than others because their governors are more likely to act responsible. And some red state governors are acting responsibly as well. And Rachel Maddow is doing an excellent job of calling them out by name, because our call-outs need to be specific and not just a broad denunciation. We need to find the people responsible and specifically call them to account for what they're doing and for the likely consequences of what they're doing, and more importantly, failing to do. So yes, we're all under the bus for Trump and the consequences of the protracted economic collapse, because he's still holding back and the Republicans are still holding back with the stimulus measures. They need to be bigger. They need to be stimulatory payments to households and individuals and small business owners that extend for a broader amount of time and not a one-off check, to restore confidence, to consumer confidence, etc. This economy is collapsing so hard because Trump weakened it. And this is a great cover for Trump's economic collapse. But I've been talking for months and months and months about what Trump has done to the economy and the blinking red signs of economic malaise, and the fact that Trump was artificially pumping up the stock exchange by getting the Fed to increase whatever it is, liquidity. I don't know. There were injections of capital into the stock market. But I knew, because I looked into what the inversion of the yield curve means, the fact that it always precedes a recession in about within 18 months, and the yield curve inverted a number of times, meaning that long-term government bonds were becoming so attractive to investors, or more attractive relatively to short-term bonds, that they had to decrease the rate of interest offered on long-term bonds in order to make long-term bonds or short-term bonds more competitive relative to long-term bonds, because the government needs you to give them the money now for 2 years. And they can't just keep... Well, anyway, they can't let the long-term bonds get so attractive that the yield curve inverts and things that are normally less popular because people don't normally want to give their money up for 10 years were becoming too popular because people understood that Trump was introducing greater risk into the economy. And if my husband had listened to me, he would not have lost a whole heap of his retirement money, our retirement money, on the stock exchange. And I've been broadcasting literally for months about the inbuilt weaknesses in the American economy that were going to bear fruit at some point sooner rather than later. And of course, the coronavirus has really helped push that crisis and magnify that crisis. So I already understood that there was likely going to be a recession. Now I think there's more likely to be a depression if leaders don't expand their stimulatory measures. Jeff is hoping that crime won't be on the increase as people need to eat. Well, we hope that the stimulus bill passed so far helps people get what they need to survive, but it is likely that crime will increase. There is a reason why Americans have been buying guns. It's because they are foreseeing a breakdown in the social order. And some of them are likely to be right, but the most likely victims of those guns are likely to be domestic violence incidents in which women are more likely to be killed as domestic tensions rise from periods of enforced home confinement. Even women who buy guns for their own protection have increased the likelihood that they will be killed by that same weapon that they purchased for their own protection. That the weapon will be taken from them by somebody physically stronger than them, that they'll be overpowered and lose their life from a gun injury, a gun wielded by a person who's either known to them or has invaded their home and overpowered them. It is much more unlikely that anybody successfully uses a gun to defend themselves than it is that somebody in a household misuses a gun, be it a depressed person. The most likely case is that a depressed person uses a gun very effectively to end their own life. And successful suicide rates dropped significantly amongst Israeli soldiers when a change in policy meant that they could no longer bring their weapons home with them. So access to guns increases suicides as well as increasing homicides. So, yes, I will go to bed. Thank you so much for being with. My hair is so flat right now. I need to wash my hair. Oh, thank you. Enlighten Up asks people to visit my YouTube channel and give a thumbs up to her broadcasts. That's true. That's helpful. I have a YouTube channel. I can share it. My YouTube channel is called DavCat43. There you go. These things help. And that's an easy way. I don't feel in these times of economic collapse that I should ask for Patreons. I have lovely Patreons, and I thank you so much. If you want to discontinue your Patreon contribution, that's fine too, because people need to take care of themselves at this moment. And I have asked sometimes for people to help me defray the costs of buying access to this website that allows me to simultaneously broadcast to YouTube and Periscope, but it doesn't feel conscionable to ask that right now. I hope everybody stays okay. I hope that there are enough mutual aid organizations set up to help people who have lost everything, people who lose jobs, who lose sources of income over the coming months and weeks. I hope our family members stay inside and stay safe. I hope our hospitals are not so irredeemably overwhelmed and overrun that people die of normally survivable conditions. Thank you for listening. Take care, all of you. Bob said in Switzerland, soldiers have weapons at home, but not ammunition. Jeff says his town has a food pantry. That's excellent. Paul's okay so far. That's good to know. Enlighten Up, thanks for joining in as well. Nice to see you live. Anybody else that I should say hello to? Bob and others. Thank you, chaps. Thanks you for listening. Take care, all of you. Bye.